Britain's population has shrunk for the first time in decades. Many people are drawn back to their EU home countries. Corona is just one reason for this. At the beginning of January, when Luigi D'Onofrio returned to Italy, he had not felt at home in Great Britain for a long time. He had moved to London 6 years earlier, and things were different. Migrants like me felt that we were part of this society. We had good jobs and felt welcome. D'Onofrio worked as a nurse in a London hospital. The health authorities had recruited him directly from his home, like thousands of EU citizens every year. But then came Brexit, and then came the pandemic, says D'Onofrio via Zoom from Milan to a German newspaper. After the Brexit vote, which was a real shock for us, the NHS health service continued to treat us with respect and appreciation. But the government made us feel like we were only here as guests. We were only tolerated because we had skills that were needed. The pandemic finally gave the impetus to start the journey home. A Milan hospital offered D'Onofrio a permanent contract, and he didn't hesitate for a minute. He quit in London. All of these countries in southern Europe, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Greece, are currently bringing their health workers back. They say, "You're a nurse? Come on, we'll take you. Working conditions are much better now." The same week D'Onofrio resigned, 5 of his EU colleagues from the same London hospital also gave up their jobs to leave. D'Onofrio and his colleagues are part of an exodus that Britain has experienced since the corona crisis. Tens of thousands of EU citizens who had lived in the country for years have moved away, many for good. So massive is the emigration movement that the resident population in Great Britain has shrunk for the first time since World War II. In the years between the Brexit referendum and the outbreak of the pandemic, the number of EU migrants fell sharply. According to figures from the Migration Observatory at Oxford University, net migration of EU citizens fell by 77% to 50,000 between 2015 and 2019. This outflow was partially offset by higher numbers of overseas immigrants, but overall migration fell from 331,000 to around 270,000 during this period. And the pandemic has accelerated the trend. Because exact statistics are not yet available, academics Jonathan Ports and Michael O'Connor from the Economic Statistics Centre of Excellence in London looked at the figures from the Labour Force survey and compared them with other surveys. And they came to an astonishing result. The UK population has shrunk by an estimated 1.3 million. The development in London is particularly blatant. Almost 700,000 people have emigrated from the metropolis. Jonathan Ports stresses on the phone that this is only an estimate, not a definite analysis. But it is clear that Britain has seen significant brain drain during the pandemic, especially London, which has become smaller for the first time in decades. There are several reasons why the development is particularly noticeable in the capital. There are more migrants in London than anywhere else, both from the EU and from overseas, says Portis. And I can agree with that. I lived in London. Many have relationships in their countries of origin and were able to return somewhere during the crisis. In addition, the city was hit harder by the pandemic than other parts of the country, not only in terms of the health crisis. London is particularly dependent on tourism, the cultural industry and the service sector, where customer contact is necessary. And finally, there are many sectors in which many migrants work. In the cafe and sandwich chain Pret à Manger, for example, which can be found on almost every corner in central London, around 2/3 of the workforce consists of EU migrants. During the pandemic, the company closed a third of its branches permanently, and over 3,000 employees were laid off. A population decline in London would be a turning point. The metropolis has grown rapidly since the beginning of the 90s, from fewer than 7 to almost 9 million inhabitants before the corona crisis. The boom is also due to the hundreds of thousands of immigrants who have settled there. Between 2005 and 2015, the number of EU citizens in London doubled, and in 2018 the number was estimated at over 1 million. Before the corona crisis, it was predicted that London would grow to 10 million inhabitants within 10 years. However, it's currently not possible to assess whether the consequences of the COVID crisis will be permanent or whether EU citizens will return when the health crisis subsides. This is where Brexit comes into play, because there has been no free movement of people for a month. Brexit poses a risk, says Ports. EU citizens who have been granted permanent residence could actually return to the UK without any problems. But others have fallen through the cracks and failed to secure this status. For them, it will be difficult to return. Maike Bohn is only too aware of this danger. She is co-founder of the 3 Million campaign, which campaigns for the rights of EU citizens after Brexit. We have a lot of people calling us now who are desperately trying to get back to the UK. People who forfeit their right to stay when they are not in the country, says Bohn. Because whoever has the so-called pre-settled status, that means the provisional right to stay, may leave Great Britain for a maximum of 6 months in order not to lose the right to permanent settled status. That means that if the government does not give in because of the corona crisis, then countless people will be denied the right of residence, even though they are actually entitled to do so. These people include many students and artists. EU citizens also recently left the country because the government did not provide enough help during the corona crisis, says Bohn. Everyone who resides here, regardless of whether they have settled status or pre-settled, is entitled to financial support and social benefits, but many employers and authorities were not aware of this. A lot of people in the creative sector and in gastronomy have contacted us who are affected by this. They want to relocate to continental Europe now, grudgingly, she says. The British often talk about economic migrants. Britain is portrayed as an attractive country if someone wants a good job. But many EU migrants like to live here, says Bohn. London in particular is a favorite destination because it's a great international city. The government proudly points out that around 4 million EU citizens have already received the right to stay. The deadline for application is until June. We want you to stay, ministers have repeatedly assured EU citizens. Well, says Bohn, I'm not entirely convinced. First, we have the problem that many people who are difficult to contact will not secure their resident status. The migrants organized campaign writes that tens of thousands of EU immigrants are at risk of being illegal migrants after the deadline. This includes people with learning disabilities and dementia, as well as the homeless. Second, the government is doing little to help EU citizens assert their rights, says Bohn. For example, we saw several dozen job advertisements that said, people without settled status don't even need to apply, even though it's against the rules. The fact that there is no physical document for the settled status, but is stored purely digitally, does not make things any easier. Many employers and banks cannot do anything with the purely digital status because discrimination is programmed this way. Headline news was a Guardian revelation that since January 1st, a cheque for up to £2,000 has been used to encourage EU citizens to leave the country voluntarily. Jonathan Portes puts this into perspective. This program has existed for many years to help irregular migrants from non-EU countries return to their country of origin. As a logical consequence of Brexit, this program is now being extended to include EU migrants who have the same legal status after the end of the free movement of persons. There are some people who would like to go home but cannot. They have no money or have become homeless, says Portes. The small sum of money should help them with this. Given the way the Home Office deals with migrants it wants to deport, a very unpleasant process, this program is by no means the worst thing Britain is doing. What the exodus of the Europeans will mean for the British economy cannot yet be determined. COVID-19 overshadowed everything, says Portes. We simply lack reliable data with regard to developments in the labour market and migration flows. A bright spot for him is the vaccination program, which is going much better in Great Britain than in the rest of Europe. Hundreds of thousands of citizens are vaccinated every day, and so far almost 14% of the population have received the first dose. Mark that, the first dose. The problem is now the second dose. It's entirely conceivable that the economic recovery will proceed faster, thinks Portes. In that case, people in Romania or Spain would ask themselves, why should I stay here when London is buzzing again and everyone is vaccinated? That would be the positive scenario. Luigi D'Onofrio is not yet sure if he will ever return to London. I left the door open. I'm still registered as a UK nurse, so it wouldn't be a problem. But I think that's unlikely. Since I've been back in Italy, I've been thinking, I'm home. And if you want to stay informed, don't forget my live stream tonight at 6 p.m. CET and subscribe to my channel and my other channels. Welcome to Brexit, sir, and auf Wiedersehen.